Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm Stephanie James, and today I'm talking to you about the modes, but more specifically, I'm talking to you about mutable signs. So I've already done the cardinal and the fixed signs. Now we're doing mutable, and I would urge you to go back and not only listen to the modes, but also to the elements as well, and go right back and listen to the beginning because I've got some great tips if you've not heard before. Great tips on free astrology software, some of the books that I recommend, and also a little bit about myself. So the modes are our way of dealing with challenge, whereas the elements are kind of our motivations and our drives and kind of what powers us in a sense, and kind of, I guess, our natural state of operation. The modes are kind of how we deal with conflict and challenge, and how we view challenge, and whether or not we see conflict as something inside us or outside of us, internal or external, really. But also, it's kind of about how we interact with our environment. Mutability it has that fast moving essence about it, and it isn't really specifically aimed in one direction. The cardinal signs kind of don't see problems as problems. They can power through it. They can find a way of solving a problem and moving over it. Fixed signs will see a problem and it will be a blockage for them, and it will stop them in their tracks. And they don't really do much about it other than sit there and wait patiently. Whereas mutable signs will inevitably, when there's a blockage in the road, full stop, will think of a million different ways that they can deal with the issue. They'll think of, I could kind of move up and back and round, or, they'll reverse, or they'll think, right, well, there was a little side road a little bit further back, or they might see a little gap and think, I can just squeeze around that bit, and if I take that route round there. So they kind of come up with ideas about how to avoid the blockage as such. So mutable signs tend to be to do with avoidance. Now, to find elements of the same sign in the horoscope, place an equilateral triangle on top of the circle, on top of the horoscope wheel, and at the tip of each of the points of the triangle, 120 degrees apart, you will find the matching element. So all of the fire signs will be at the tips of the triangles. Now, to find the modes, the same mode, so now we're looking for mutable signs, you place an equilateral square on top of the zodiac wheel, the horoscope wheel, and at the corner of each square you'll find the same mode. So each element, so earth, air, fire and water, will be made up. When you break it down to the three signs in that element, each sign will be one of three modes: cardinal, fixed and mutable. So with the cardinal signs, we know that they instigate the season. So when the sun crosses over into Aries from Pisces, we have spring. When it crosses over from Sagittarius to Capricorn, we have winter. So we've got the spring equinox, the autumn equinox, the winter solstice and the summer solstice. We've got those points. And when we have the fixed signs, we know that we're in the middle of the season. So it's that period where the weather doesn't really seem to change. Everything's in a kind of fixed state, and we look around and we feel like we're really right in the throes of it all. So it's, nothing seems to change really. So if it's been snowing and it's freezing, it just feels like it's been snowing and freezing forever. And if it's been when it's that lovely period in Taurus season where you're looking around and everything's sort of blossoming, and it's just like that really uplifting feeling, that it's like, oh, the good weather's here and it's just going to be nice, and I don't have to really think too much about how many layers I'm going to have to wear or whether I'm going to have to bring a raincoat. With the mutable signs, that is really the points in the season where there is change. This is kind of how we get that sense of mutability and adaptability, because it's not quite cardinal and it's not quite fixed. It's like right in the middle. So the mutable signs follow the fixed signs. So there'll be a point where it'll stop feeling so fixed and suddenly you'll notice little changes. And it's that point where you're literally blending from fixed into the next cardinal sign, or from that fixed point in the season to the next point on the wheel of the year. So, from Aquarius season, which is usually when it's pretty cold and pretty sometimes snowy and chilly, and you just feel like, oh, when's it going to be over? Then you get into Pisces season, where it all starts to feel a little bit different. The snow's melting, so perhaps there's a lot of water everywhere, and you get a sense that the seasons are shifting. And in the same way, with Leo season being in full throes, in full swing, then all of a sudden you get this sense that there's a little bit of a shift. The weather kind of cools down a bit, which is quite nice, and not necessarily always cools down immediately, but definitely you start to notice a bit of the temperature cools down a little bit, things change a little bit, the crops are dried out and ready for harvesting in the fields, and Virgo season very much is connected to harvest festivals, and preparing for the coming months. So the mutable seasons are actually, once you've come out of that fixity, there's a sense of preparation for what's coming next, because we know that as soon as we notice those changes, we start having to think about, okay, the weather's changing again. Am I going to need to wear this? Am I going to have to wear that? Are my plants going to need more or less water? I know I have in my house almost exclusively plants that thrive on neglect, because having high maintenance plants can be quite a commitment. I barely ever remember to feed myself, let alone watering a plant. But I am quite good with plants, actually. I am quite green fingered. But with the succulents like cacti, in the summer they do need a bit more water than they do in the winter. But as the seasons change, you have to kind of play it by ear and see how thirsty they are. So there's a real sense of kind of being aware of your environment and being in touch with what the changes are, and what you need to do, the little adjustments you need to make in order to kind of accommodate that shift. As mentioned, with the mutable signs, we've got Pisces shifting between winter and spring. We've got we've got Virgo season, which is shifting between summer and autumn, and then also with Virgo season, you've got that kind of, it's that back to school vibe as well after the summer holidays, which is like really nice to give people time off in the summer. At school, I used to love my 6-week holidays, and then that kind of preparing to go back to school. There's a sense of new pencil cases, if you need new shoes, new uniform, all of that kind of stuff that you have to prepare. And for me, it was all about the stationery. It always is. I love stationery. It's a very Gemini thing, is stationery, by the way, if you're into it. It's very mercurial and very Gemini, Virgo, I guess. I really love an excuse to buy any kind of new stationery. It's got to the point now where I have to stop, because it's just pointless having all this stuff. But going to shops like Paper Chase for me, when I was going back to school, it was WH Smith. I used to go to WH Smith. I used to get all the stuff. I used to love it. Love the new rubbers, the new pencil, that smell, that lovely new, it's plastic, so my memory of plastic, smelling that new plastic is perhaps not so good for the environment anymore, but that was back in those days when, we didn't really think about what we were doing to the planet, we just did it. And then, so you've got from Virgo season, which is the shift into autumn, then you've got that Sagittarius, which is the shift from autumn into winter. And it's nice that Sagittarius season is quite once you've got through the really depths of the underworld with Scorpio, and you're kind of letting go of all that dark stuff and accepting, there's almost an acceptance with them going through Scorpio season that the nights are really short now. You gain an hour in the UK, so you get an extra hour in bed, which is lovely, and in Scorpio season. And then when you're into Sagittarius season, it's about kind of going out and partying and enjoying and letting go of the process of really winding down to the end of the year, and letting go of the things that you didn't achieve, and having hope for the future of things that you want to achieve, and it's that shift between the kind of autumn into winter, where that there's a chance for us all to be reborn again at the new year. So I quite like the way that the year works as far as astrology is concerned, because it ties in that our new year as astrologers is Aries season. But before we get to Aries season, we do have that kind of winter slumber that starts when the sun moves into Capricorn. And for that quarter of the year, it's kind of about, starting over. It's kind of the year's new moon phase, really. So that's just a little bit about the seasons and how the seasonal shift works with all the modes. And now we've gone through the cardinal, the fixed and mutable. So we're doing the mutable signs today, which are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius and Pisces, one of each element. Gemini is mutable air, Virgo is mutable earth, Sagittarius is mutable fire, and Pisces is mutable water. So mutability is the way that we deal with conflict and the way we deal with challenge. Now, if there's something that kind of presents as a challenge, mutable signs tend to be the ones that come up with a variety of different ways of dealing with that challenge. Myself, I have a mutable ascendant, and when I am driving somewhere, if I think there's going to be a traffic jam, I'll always try and take a different route, which is kind of logic. But if I do find myself sitting in traffic for too long, I will start thinking, how can I get around this? How can I get to a different place? Where some people just think, I've made my choice, I'm going to stick with it, So that's the mutability is constantly looking for different ways to move, and it's quite dispersed energy. It's not very direct. A motto for mutability might be, life's about the journey, not the destination. Whereas, the cardinal signs are much more about getting somewhere, achieving something, getting to that destination, and where are we going next? And the fixed signs are probably more about thinking about how to find a place where they can, maybe their destination is actually about not having to exert as much energy getting there. So waiting until they spot a window, or there's been some kind of new invention where they can teleport themselves without actually having to make much effort at all. Patience and the waiting game is key for the fixed signs. Cardinal signs are all about now, let's do this now. And, where am I going? How am I going to get to my goal? And mutable signs are like, I did have a goal. I was going to do that, but I've changed my mind and I think I'm going to aim for this now. And I'll get back to that one. So anybody who's quite mutable might identify with having a lot of pots boiling, having to keep an eye on a lot of different projects, which is what it makes them quite good in the workplace at managing for, like, a lot of different roles, a lot of different projects. So somebody at work who's mutable might actually be quite good at project management, or at least dealing with a variety of things that are kind of need dealing with right now. They're very good at kind of juggling. So the clues in the name with mutable signs, they're able to mutate in some way. So if something doesn't suit them, or they don't suit something, they can be almost a chameleon in order to fit in with their surrounding. And it's not necessarily that they aim to please, or that they're people pleasers, or that they need to fit in. It's just that actually they can adapt if necessary, if it suits them. There's an element of flex and flow about them. I think that with mutable signs, they do seem to like to constantly be moving. So they don't necessarily have to be moving very fast, but they are constantly moving. There seems to be a constant sort of flux and transition, almost if you can imagine the waves moving in and out. There is a sense of watery movement about the mutable signs. And actually, if you think about mutable air, you can always imagine the air being, quite windy, like a windy day, and you watch like a carrier bag being blown around like on American Beauty. That kind of mutability where it just flows. It's not like that kind of stuffy heat that you get on a summer's day that there's no wind, there's no air, and there's no movement, and it feels a bit stifling. Mutable air is constantly changing. 1 minute it's quite windy, the next minute it dies down a bit, but it's blowing stuff around with it. And mutable earth, I always think of as sand. I think of sand in an egg timer, sand on the beach. You can pick it up, you can move it, you can make it into a little sand castle if you want to. You can dig it out and have a little river of seawater flowing through it. But sand, sand dunes, they literally change. Apparently they move. I was reading somewhere that they actually move around, almost like they've got a little life of their own, which is kind of eerie but awesome. And then you have mutable fire, which you can think of as perhaps the Olympic flame, but actually fire in general, the way that fire moves around. I'm just suddenly reminded of the riots that occurred back in, was it 2011? I think it was 2011 when there were the riots, and they started out. I think they started out in Tottenham, and then they spread all over the country. And in Croydon, where I'm from, somebody decided to torch Reeves Corner, which was it was just a very established family business that sold furniture and sofas and things like that. And the flames, I was watching it on the news, knowing that it was not that far from where I lived, watching the flames engulf the floor, and it looked like an ocean of flames. So, and fire moves in that way. It literally, it crawls, it climbs, it can get out of control very easily. And, when fire catches onto something, it can spread that flame. I guess that's the spark of inspiration that Sagittarius has, that ability to pass that flame of knowledge onto others. It's the ease in which fire can spread and travel. So that's kind of Sagittarius. And Pisces is, again, that's like the ocean. As far as watery states go, Pisces is really the open ocean, that kind of unpredictable, almost, it's a formidable force, the open ocean. You just don't know what you're going to encounter when you get out there, and you're braving the elements on your own, literally the elements on your own. So this kind of mutability, this changeability in the signs is extremely telling in how somebody is going to react to challenge. And just generally with their personality types as well. So somebody with a lot of mutability is going to be interested in a lot of different things. They're going to have a lot of different hobbies. They're probably going to have a lot of stuff going on, but nothing really consistent. The only consistent thing about mutability is that they're consistently varied. They might not be so good at keeping commitments. The fixed signs are pretty good at that. The cardinal signs can be as well, but the mutable signs tend to be a lot less. They don't care. It's not that they don't care about keeping commitments, but they've just got a lot of stuff going on, and they need to have that freedom in their routine in order to allow them to change as and when they need to. And they're very much like to go with the flow. And change is part of who they are, so they want to make sure that they include change in their plans, and that change is something that they are able to. Most mutable signs that I know, and myself having a mutable ascendant, I do like to keep my plans quite loose, because I know that as long as I've got a rough idea of what I need to do, I need to have freedom within that to kind of go with the flow of what I need to, because trying to force yourself to commit to something and trying to push through something that doesn't feel natural, you're not going to get as authentic a result as authentic as you would like. I can't even speak today. So something that's fun to think about. Cardinal signs always think they're right. The fixed signs think that they're right as well. They don't like change, and they don't like to apologise, whereas the mutable signs will apologise all the time. They'll repeatedly say that they're sorry. They'll repeat things, and they'll do things over and over. The mutable signs don't mind going back over and doing things again. I had one of my an ex-boyfriend of mine was extremely mutable. He had a lot of mutability in his chart, and he spent a lot of time as a musician in the studio going over his music, redoing the music, re-recording the music, because he could not capture the sound he wanted, because every time he went back in, he changed his mind about what he wanted. It was really difficult to capture. And once he'd recorded something and released it, because he did have some stuff that had been released, and he was signed. He had a recording contract with Sony long time ago, and so he had some hits in America, which he kind of would listen back and say, "Oh, I wish we'd have done it this way. I wish we'd have done it that way." Now I know that most people would want to change things. You do naturally want to change things, but for him, it was really hard to actually pin down what he wanted, especially when he was recording himself. So the mutable signs are also kind of, as far as looking forward or travelling around goes, they tend to look back a lot. The mutable signs are kind of rear view mirror people. And it can be that they are looking back and thinking, where I've come from is kind of better than where I'm going, even though they actually have a great time where they're going, but they don't realise it because they're constantly thinking about what they had before. Classic person for this, actually. Just watch The American Office for the second or third time, actually, now, the whole series. Andy Bernard, who is quite a lovable and hateable character in it. They take you on a roller coaster with Andy Bernard. He says, without kind of ruining it for everybody, he says in the last episode, he says, I spent my whole time sitting in this office thinking about my old friends, thinking about my uni days, and thinking that I was missing out on something, and that I had it better then. And he said, and since I've left this place, I spend all my time now looking back and thinking about the people that I left behind and the fun that I had in this office, and thinking about how much I loved it here. And that's kind of a very mutable way of being. You kind of look back really fondly. I mean, it's very watery as well and very lunar, but actually it's quite mutable in the sense that it's easy to look back and think about, the things that you've just walked away from. Whereas the fixed signs might walk away and say, that's it, I'm done with that situation now, I'm ready to move forward, I'm done. And the cardinal signs also, probably. The mutable signs just kind of, they're not too proud to go back. They're not too, they're not too stuck in their ways. They're not too committed to an idea about how a situation ended, maybe, or perhaps even, just they're just not as rigid, which has its pros and its cons. The mutable signs are also, quite restless, and, there can be a sense of shifting goalposts. If you've ever worked for somebody who's quite mutable, they constantly change their mind about what they want you to achieve. And, when it comes to like the realm of ideas with Gemini and Virgo, there can be a sense of changing your mind about everything. And with Pisces and Sagittarius, there's a sense of like beliefs and ideologies, which you may change your belief system more than one time in your life if you've got a strong Sagittarius or Pisces mutability. And like I said, they can be a little bit commitment shy at times, strong mutable types. I think Brad Pitt actually is a double Sagittarius. And obviously, I'm not saying that he's commitment shy. He did make commitments, but he has that ability for movement. He's got that ability. He left Jen for Angelina, and he's then him and Angelina broke up. But there's no real idea as to whether or not. No one really has confirmed what happened as far as that situation is concerned. But now it's all over the papers that he's hanging around with Jen again. Are they back together? I don't even know. But it's interesting how he's quite mutable in his sense, and he can move backwards and forwards in his life. It's that ability to kind of, I guess if you were playing a computer game, the cardinal signs would just be moving forward. The fixed signs might be able to sort of like move side to side a bit, but, don't really progress much. But their progression is very slow, but they do progress. Whereas the mutable signs have the ability to move all over. I'm thinking chessboard, like the Queen. She can go everywhere. She's mutable. Um, anyway, a well-developed sense of mutability is to be adaptable and flexible, to be able to change your plans absolutely when you need to, and not to get too obsessed with when a plan gets cancelled and then your whole day's thrown out. It gives the ability to be able to just accept that things change and accept, you can just get on with things and pick up something new and start with that instead. Mutability is quite inclusive and quite able to, it's quite accepting of other ideas and other ways of being. It's not particularly overbearing or doesn't sort of like try and wield its ideas over other people. It's quite forgiving in a sense, generally quite forgiving. I think that the mutable signs are quite forgiving and quite apologetic, as I've said. They can adjust very easily, and all of the mutable signs seem to be on a journey of curiosity or searching in some way for something more. Can be an overdeveloped sense of mutability, can be overly malleable, like just being too flexible, almost like there's no sense of backbone. They're just too bending, too accommodating, too changeable, and not just no backbone, but also no sense of direction. Just, I'm thinking about, Pisceans who have a strong Piscean signature in their chart. They can be like a fish just swimming around a bowl constantly, not really going anywhere, not really doing anything, just floundering around. There's no real sense of direction. The Gemini might be so swept up with multiple tasks, and what makes them great. This is not being overdeveloped in an area doesn't mean that it's bad. It means that your skill set is going to be incredibly varied. It's like that jack of all trades, master of none type quality. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be good at doing stuff. You're going to have a very specific set of skills that you acquire over your lifetime. It might be that with mutable signs as well, they're not able to be exclusive. They're not able to exclude things, so that they might struggle with, they just want to do. For me, the mutable signs are all about the fear of missing out. They just don't want to miss out. They don't really want to say no to anything, and then they say yes to everything, and then when it comes to the day that they've quadruple booked themselves, they have to say no to 4 people, or they do everything really half-assed. They'll give a quarter of themselves to each project, and people kind of think, well, that wasn't really the effort I was expecting. That was kind of a bit of a disappointment. I expected more from that person. So not just the fear of missing out, but also when it comes to, perhaps choosing their subjects at uni, they may spend forever trying to decide what they have to specialise in. And even when they've chosen, they might be sitting there thinking, the grass is greener on the other side. I should have chosen that other subject. They can feel a little bit like they're lost and directionless. And scattered and anxious as well is another thing. Anxiety is quite a strong kind of tendency, particularly with the mercurial signs, Gemini and Virgo. They can be quite anxious. Sagittarius and Pisces are perhaps a little bit more throw it out to the universe and just see what comes back. But Gemini and Virgo, the mercurial signs, are a bit more, they need to kind of know what's happening. They want to understand what's happening. Gemini wants to label it and Virgo wants to make sense of it. So an underdeveloped sense of mutability can be, not being very accommodating, not being very flexible, not really being able to adapt to the situation. Somebody who sticks out in my mind is a lady I know who basically she is classic fixed. She didn't want to leave her job because she was sure they should have made her redundant, and she was waiting for a redundancy payout, and she was waiting and she was waiting and she was waiting for her redundancy payout. She was waiting to be made redundant. She never got it. She stayed in her job way past her retirement because she believed she was due this redundancy payout, and she ended up having a health issue which forced her to retire, because it got to the point where she was being so inflexible and waiting so much for this thing that she expected that actually she was probably going to wait it out to the grave. And that's very fixed. That's incredibly fixed. So somebody like that might not have had that mutability in their chart that would say, I suppose mutability is kind of having the humility, as Gary Vaynerchuk, he says, have the humility to drop things. So realise, don't be so precious, don't be so possessive. You know that sometimes not all your projects are going to work out and you do have to drop a few things. Now, lacking that ability in your chart might lead to you being overwhelmed, holding on to too many things, not being very accommodating, really struggling to adjust to new situations, rejecting changes, being that old grumpy guy who refuses to get a mobile phone. Somebody I used to work with who just was like, I'm not getting a mobile phone, I'm not getting this, I'm not doing that, I'm doing it the way I always used to do it, and just really didn't want to move with the times. And he eventually did get a smartphone, but it took him I'm talking way longer than anybody else I ever knew. I'm talking literally like a couple of years ago he got his first smartphone, which was, even by those standards, was like a really bog standard basic smartphone. So these people that just really refuse to move with the times. And yeah, uncomfortable with moving goalposts as well. I have to say, I am kind of guilty of this. I do really like to know what's going on, and I think that's because I'm a bit of a control freak. As I've said, I'm a Capricorn. I've got a lot of fixity in my chart. And when my plans do change, which I'm usually happy when people say, I can't do this or I can't do that because, and I go, okay, that's great, because I've got a million other things I want to do, because my Gemini ascendant is constantly juggling. But if it's some sort of plan that I've made and it's like a social plan, and then the plans change last minute, I do kind of really know, I need to know what's going on, where are we going? Usually because I've got other plans built around it. So I do find the changing of goalposts a little bit difficult sometimes, and particularly if you're working on a project, doing something at work, if you're constantly being told conflicting things, that can be quite challenging. And yeah, I guess being narrow-minded as well, not just narrow-minded, but just narrow in your outlook, can also be a bit of an underdeveloped sense of mutability, and just kind of not really having that flexibility, not really having any variety in your life as well, being a bit stale, I guess. So I think you can see that, as we've talked about the modes, they all feed into each other, because there's no exclusive mode in your chart. There's not going to be an exclusive, we are everything. Everything in the chart is part of us. We'll have more planets in some areas than others, and that just means that we are going to feed into that type of message from the chart more quickly. It's having more of a connection when you've got more planets or more points there. But it doesn't mean that we don't have the other aspects of the chart within us. It just means that we have more access to the things that are heavily populated than others. And everything kind of feeds in and works with each other. So if you do happen to have a well-developed area in one way, the underdeveloped areas are going to express themselves in a way that, it's almost like a spectrum. The chart is like a spectrum. It's not a black and white thing. It's not you are this and not that. It really isn't very black and white. It is a spectrum where we kind of have a different kind of volume levels, different types of saturation in certain areas than others. So it's not that you are just a cardinal sign and you are just fire. You're not just Aries. Your chart tells a massive story, and the art in the chart is being able to tell the story of how these conflicting things, how these differing modes and elements blend together to create your story. So, I picked some, I hope I've covered everything I wanted to as far as that's concerned. So for my subscriber chart, I have got Caris. I've talked about Caris before because I think I talked about her in air and also in earth, because she's got she's got an interesting looking chart. If you haven't seen it, go on the website, go on stelliumastrology.com, and I'll put a little image. Her chart's on my website a few times in the air and earth episode, and now in the mutability one. And I did say I'd talk about Caris as a mutable sign because she has got a lot of mutability in her chart. She has a Virgo ascendant, and she also has three planets in Gemini, but also her midheaven and Chiron in Gemini as well. So she's got a lot of stuff going on in mutable signs, which, as I said, mutability kind of describes movement. And Caris has got she's moved about a lot. She's lived in different countries. She's travelled a lot. By the way, did I mention that her Gemini stellium happens to be in the area of her chart which describes overseas travel. So she's done a lot of learning courses abroad. As before, I described that she can speak a few different languages. She's been able to be very flexible and move between speaking Portuguese and English very easily. That's a very mutable quality. And both her ascendant and her stellium are ruled by Mercury, which is the planet of communication. It's the planet that kind of wants to process everything. In mutable earth sense, it sort of processes the things that we put into our body and helps us to understand which things work for us in our body and which things don't. And in the air sense, the Gemini sense, Mercury likes to process what we put into our brain and label it and understand what everything is as far as that is in a logical sense. So Caris has got quite a mutable chart, and like I said, she's very flexible in her approach to communication. She has a flexible daily practice of yoga, which I associate yoga with. It's a mind, body, spirit thing as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's a very mutable. It's all about flow. It's all about breathing and connecting with this state of constant flux. And so that's, I think that for Caris, being stuck, getting into a fixed situation is quite difficult for her, but she's got that cardinality in her Sun and her Neptune and her Jupiter in Capricorn, which help her come up with solutions for how to get out of situations where she's stuck. But when she's well and truly stuck, which she has been a few times, and she does have a couple of fixed planets, but not an overemphasis of fixity. But when she does have that, when it presents itself and she does feel a little bit stuck in her situation, she's able to adjust her mindset accordingly to free herself from the restrictions that she might be experiencing in a physical sense. So sometimes the mutability isn't just about changing your environment. Sometimes it's about changing your attitude. The other thing she's got in a mutable sign is Uranus in Sagittarius. Forgot to mention that. So she has actually got 5 placements in mutable signs, but also her angles as well. So ascendant, descendant, midheaven, and IC, all mutable. So that's interesting, I think, myself personally. Okay, and another person that I think has a fair amount of mutability in their chart, but not a heavy emphasis of mutability, is Sammy. And Sammy from Kent. So she lacks air in her chart, what I've written here, but she does have Pisces rising, Jupiter rising in Pisces, and she's also got Uranus and her midheaven and Saturn in Sagittarius, and she's got Chiron in Gemini on the bottom of the chart and her IC, and she's also got Venus and Moon in Virgo, which is also mutable. So actually a little bit more mutability than I'd first noticed. And again, this describes somebody who is adaptable, who is open to suggestion. And when they do face a blockage, so she's got cardinality, a fair amount of cardinality, and also, when I say a fair amount of cardinality, her Sun, Mars are cardinal and Neptune. But she does have a little bit of fixity in her chart. So she does have Mercury and Pluto, which is fixed in her chart. Which means that actually, as far as her situation goes, I think Sammy has a really great way of adapting to challenges that she faces. She's really good at making sense of problems, and she's actually really good at making sense of other people's problems. And at work, she's probably seen as somebody who's incredibly good at taking on any of the challenges that arise in her workplace and basically adapting to any issues that might come up. Usually seen, like I said, as a jack of all trades, master of none, or perhaps even in Sammy's sense, just somebody who's willing to do anything to help the team along. She does have a lot of stuff going on in her 10th house, so she may be seen as a master of something. But Mercury in Leo, square Pluto in Scorpio, here's a challenge, because these are two aspects that are in a challenge. So they're 90 degrees apart, or thereabouts 90 degrees apart in those fixed signs, which kind of challenges her mutability in a way, because the fixed signs want to kind of stay in one place, whereas the mutable signs want to keep moving. For Sammy, this may be that actually the problem lies for her in her ability to overthink things, actually. And she has Mercury in the 5th house in Leo, which is incredibly creative, incredibly good at coming up with, ways of... it's probably good at focusing at a singular issue and dedicating a lot of time and thought and effort to it. And good at working with hands. Hair obviously is indicated with Leo as well. I can't remember. I know Sammy is a client. I spoke to her a long, long time ago now. But the problem with somebody who has Mercury in a fixed sign is that they can get stuck in a thought, kind of in a feedback loop. They can kind of get stuck in a mindset which doesn't really help them in the long run. And, Mercury in Leo can be quite dramatic sometimes. And especially when it's square Pluto, it can really go to some dark places, and it can actually really create some obstacles for itself that are really unnecessary. So that could be what prevents you from being as free as your chart demands you to be, Sammy. But that little blockage that you do have in that fixed area in your chart isn't a huge one. So I doubt that you get too stuck in a rut. You're probably, if anything, really good at coming up with new ways of moving forward and very flexible in your attitude towards life. So probably don't get too stuck in a rut very often. But, maybe your mindset not necessarily limits you, but perhaps you have had to work on your thought process to transform it from a negative mindset to working on maybe a bit more mindfulness and seeing things in a more positive light. So it would be great to know what you think about that, Sammy, if you could let me know. And who else did I want to talk about today? I think actually I wanted to just stick to 2 charts for my subscribers because it gets a bit long-winded otherwise. Now, some celebrity charts I wanted to look at. I did previously look at Bob Dylan, but I was just going to mention Bob Dylan again because he actually has a stellium of planets in fixed signs. Let me just call up his chart. So Bob Dylan actually has a stellium of planets in fixed signs. He has Moon, Jupiter, Uranus and Saturn all bundled together in Taurus. So this describes somebody who has discipline to an extent and the ability to focus and that creative potential that comes from sitting there and building on one area that you're focusing on. But actually, Bob also has, his ascendant is in Sagittarius, and he has got 3 planets in Gemini on the descendant. So and Neptune also in Virgo, which is feeding down to him, and Mars in Pisces feeding up to that Gemini stuff. So Mars in Pisces, Neptune in Virgo, all of that Gemini stuff, and his Sagittarius ascendant makes Bob incredibly mutable yet again. And not to want to call him aimless, because he isn't. It's not that he hasn't achieved a lot of things, but he's not really. I remember watching. I can't remember if it was called No Direction Home. That might have been the DVD that I watched. Which is a Martin Scorsese documentary about Bob Dylan, and it's fantastic. And he describes his music change tasting. Did I say that or did I say toasting? Either way, maybe I'm hungry. So his music tastes changed, or his writing style changed, and his audience were really dead against it. So it's interesting if you think about the element of fixity that he has to deal with, which could well be described as Neptune, the planet of drip distribution, is trine all of his Taurus stuff, because it's Neptune's in an earth sign and so is all his Taurus stuff. That could actually describe the people that he's communicating his message to, and they really like the the kind of travelling minstrel that Bob Dylan was, that went around with his guitar and just played his songs, which they called kind of like they carried a message, and it was kind of war, sort of anti-war. Let's see if I can see what it says on here. They called him the voice of the 60s. but they kind of looked at him as somebody who kind of was anti-war and civil rights, and kind of had this kind of message. But it was an image that I think that they were interested in more than anything. They had this idea of what they wanted him to be. And when he changed and he got the Bob Dylan band, I can't remember what the band was called. I think it was just like the Bob Dylan band. He upgraded it to a more rocky style. And people were turning up to his gig and listening to his music and going, oh, what is this rubbish? You know, people were actually walking out of Bob Dylan's gigs and saying, how rubbish was that? Like, I can't believe he's trying to like jazz it up and go for a bit of rock music. Bring back the music that we love. I want to listen to what I want to listen to. I want to listen to the music that you wrote that I like. The stuff you've always done, don't change. And Bob didn't listen to the critics. He just did what he wanted to, because he essentially believed that, he is just, he just creates. He's just a creative who wants to put out his music, his message. And again, you can't kind of clamp, you can't kind of categorise, you can't put it in a box. His art, the skill, what he's working with. So Bob Dylan's a really interesting one. And again, he did the typical sort of like mercurial travelling around and kind of like the typical kind of musician image that you got from the 1960s. Pick up his guitar, in its case, jump on the back of a train with a bit of money in his back pocket, and then just went busking around, got a few gigs, worked his way around the circuit, gained respect from people, and really spoke to people. He seemed to voice a lot of the issues that were going on back then in a way that many people really identified with. And he's, again, that staying power with Bob Dylan. He's still around. He had a motorbike accident, I believe, and after the accident, he got heavily into spirituality. I don't know if he became a Christian after that, but he definitely changed his spiritual views, and his music kind of adapted to reflect the changes in his life, because actually he's a commentator, a social commentator, but also a personal commentator, and doesn't particularly want to categorise himself. Another person who doesn't want to be categorised too much is Amy Winehouse. Now, she was a Virgo with a Gemini ascendant, and I can't remember what else she had in Mutable Signs. That might have been it, just off the top of my head. Let's have a look at Amy. Amy Winehouse, yes. So Amy has Neptune, Jupiter and Uranus in Sagittarius around her 7th house of other people and her descendant. And she also has Sun, Mercury in Virgo and Gemini rising. And Amy, she struggled a lot when she had to go around touring and just constantly putting out the same old album over and over again. She was gifted as a jazz singer. She loved jazz because jazz is unpredictable. You kind of have to just go with it and improvise. And, you know, it's not very restricted. It's not particularly, you can't just put jazz in a box. It's not the same performance 2 nights on the trot. It's that buzz that people get from live television. It's the same thing with jazz musicians. They get this kind of buzz of doing it live and doing it now, and this is how it works. But yeah, she happened to fall into the public fell in love with her and with her album. That I think she did the album with Mark Ronson. And let's have a quick look. What does it say? I don't think it says that she did it with Mark Ronson. But yeah, unfortunately, I think part of her downfall was obviously meeting and mixing with the wrong people, but also the fact that she was trying to escape because her life wasn't really her own anymore. She didn't have the freedom that she wanted. She was kind of stuck in a creative rut because the music she wanted to create wasn't possible. She didn't have the time for it because she was forced to constantly go out and repeat the same performance over and over and over and over and over and over again. And if you watch the documentary, the Amy Winehouse documentary, can't remember which one it was, I know there's a couple, but the one that was not so favourable towards her parents or to her father particularly, that documentary was interesting because she does kind of describe how she would deal with getting famous because she just doesn't think she would cope. And you really do get the sense of mutability with her, and the sense of this constant creative channel that doesn't really want to label what she's got, and she doesn't really want to categorize it and put it into a box. So Amy was an interesting one. She just popped up in my thoughts. And the other one who I think is really interesting is our relatively new, but incredible megastar, Billie Eilish. Billie Eilish has got a stellium in Sagittarius. She's got Pluto, Venus, her midheaven sun, and her sun all in Sag, and then just out of sign in Capricorn, it's Mercury. She's also got Saturn in Gemini and a Pisces ascendant with Mars in Pisces. The only planets that she doesn't have in mutable signs are Uranus, Moon, and Neptune in Aquarius, a fixed sign, and also Jupiter in Cancer. So she is heavily mutable, Billie Eilish. And so far she's had some quite incredibly grounding transits. So she's had Saturn move all the way across her mutable stuff in Sagittarius. And though it gave her freedom to explore the world, because she actually went on tour and she put her music out, it kind of defined her at the same time. And she talks a lot about the fact that she doesn't really want to be defined. Quite mutable, I don't really want people to define me. This isn't who I am. I am not this thing that people think I am. That's kind of very mutable. So she's had this definitive Saturn transit all over the top part of her chart and her public persona and reputation area, and it's going to be moving over her Moon and her Neptune and her Uranus placement soon in Aquarius towards the end of this year, when Saturn goes into Aquarius. From 2021 is going to be another year for Billie Eilish, to another definitive year, I guess, for Billie Eilish. And by the time it reaches her ascendant, that is probably where it's going to start. I think that we're going to start seeing the effects of the impact that this kind of life has had on Billie, as far as curtailing her true sense of freedom, not really actually being able to go out anymore, because everywhere she goes she causes a stampede. And that freedom that mutability needs is depressing at first, when she said that she was talking. In fact, I'll tell you what you should do is you should watch the Vanity Fair interview of her talking about how her climb to fame. And there's 2 Vanity Fair interviews where they interview her a year apart. So the first one's 2017 to 2018, and then the next interview is 2017, 18 and 19. And you can hear the pressure she was under with her Saturn transit, but also the lack of freedom she had and the lack of autonomy that she really wanted, and anonymity as well. So that would be a really interesting one. And I've actually written an article about Billie Eilish, which I'll link to in the blog post that I create for this episode. So I hope you found this episode interesting. I've really enjoyed talking about mutability, and I've enjoyed producing the modes for you, this little series on the modes. If you haven't heard the previous episodes, please go back and listen over them. The next episodes I'm going to be creating for you is a series on the sun signs. It's about time we got onto the actual zodiac signs, and the signs of the zodiac. So the next episodes I'm creating for you are going to be on the zodiac signs, because I keep referring to all these things, which, if you already know about them, it makes sense. But if you don't really know about them, then maybe this has all sounded like gobbledygook. But I'm kind of assuming you know about them, so I just want to put something out for each of the signs, just for you to get into them a little bit deeper than you already are. And we'll be well on our way to having a good coverage of all aspects of astrology. And hopefully the episodes will be a bit shorter as well. It's a bit difficult to do short episodes when you're doing the elements and the modes, because they cover a bunch of signs in one go. Whereas the sun signs, we can really focus in on particular areas now. So I'm looking forward to that. Let me know if you're mutable. Let me know if you lack mutability in your chart and you can relate to anything that I said. Let your friends know if they've missed these episodes and this could really relate to them, or if they're Billie Eilish fans, for example. And also, don't forget to subscribe, rate and review this podcast if you're enjoying it on the iTunes Store or any of the podcasting platforms that you're listening on. I have just had news that I am now on Amazon Music as well, which is really exciting. I'm on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Deezer. I can't even think of all the different places that I'm out there on, but now I'm on Amazon Music as well, which is really exciting for me, a little further reaching. And if you want to have your chart featured on this show, just subscribe to my mailing list, fill out the application form, and you will you will get featured. I will find a way to squeeze you in. I'm very mutable. I can squeeze you in. I can find a way to talk about you. So thank you very much for tuning in. I've really enjoyed it. I'm ending on a high. I feel great. I'm going to go have something to eat now and definitely get myself a drink because I am thirsty. Take care, you guys. I'll speak to you next time.